In the depths of primordial darkness, before the first wave ever kissed a shore, before the ocean's rhythmic heartbeat became the lullaby of sailors and the terror of kings, there existed only chaos. Yet from this endless void would emerge a force so profound, so elemental, that his very breath would shape coastlines, and his anger would swallow entire civilizations whole. Tonight, we embark upon the complete chronicle of Poseidon, the Earthshaker, the Lord of Horses, the sovereign ruler of all waters that flow across our world. Picture, if you will, the moment when time itself began to take shape. The ancient Greeks understood that before Zeus claimed the heavens, before Hades descended into shadow, there was a titanic struggle that would determine the very fabric of existence. And at the heart of this cosmic drama stood three brothers whose destinies would forever alter the relationship between mortals and the divine. But our story begins not with triumph, but with terror, hunger, and the desperate act of a father consumed by paranoia. Deep within the sacred caves of Crete, where shadows dance with whispered prophecies, the Titan Kronos ruled with an iron fist wrapped around a terrible secret. He had devoured his children, swallowing them whole the moment they drew their first breath, because a prophecy had warned him that one of his sons would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his own father. Each birth became a feast of horror, each cry of life silenced by the grinding darkness of his throat. Yet fate, as the ancient Greeks knew so well, cannot be cheated forever. When Rhea bore her sixth child, Zeus, she could no longer bear to watch another son disappear into the abyss of Kronos' belly. In desperation, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband, who devoured it without question while the real infant was spirited away to safety. But what of the children who had already fallen victim to their father's monstrous appetite? They remained alive within him, growing stronger, waiting, their divine essence refusing to be extinguished even in that living tomb. Among these imprisoned deities was Poseidon, second-born of the six, destined to become master of the seas. Even trapped within the churning depths of his father's stomach, the future god of earthquakes felt the pull of water, the call of tides that had not yet been born, the whisper of storms that would one day rage across oceans not yet created. His very presence caused Kronos to experience strange dreams of drowning, of being pulled beneath impossible waves that crashed not from above, but from within. The day of liberation came with thunder and lightning, with Zeus standing tall before his father, now grown to magnificent adulthood through Rhea's protection and the wisdom of ancient nurses. The young god forced a mixture of wine and mustard down Kronos' throat, causing him to violently regurgitate his children in reverse order of their consumption. First came Hestia, goddess of the hearth, then Demeter of the harvest, followed by Hera, future queen of the gods, then Hades, lord of the underworld, and finally, emerging in a cascade of divine light and the sound of crashing waves, Poseidon himself. Imagine the moment when the future ruler of all waters first breathed free air, when his eyes beheld the world that would become his domain. He stood there, fully grown, yet newly born into consciousness, his hair the colour of sea foam, his eyes reflecting the depths of oceans that existed only in potential. Around him, his siblings stretched and marvelled at their freedom. But Poseidon felt something different, something that called to him from every drop of moisture in the air, every underground stream, every cloud pregnant with rain. The newly freed gods quickly realized that their liberation was only the beginning of their struggles. Kronos would not surrender his throne willingly, and behind him stood the might of the Titans, beings of such ancient power that they had shaped the very bones of the earth. What followed was a war that would shake the foundations of reality itself, a conflict so devastating that its echoes would resonate through every myth and legend that followed. The Titanomachy, as this cosmic war came to be known, raged for 10 years across battlefields that spanned from the highest peaks of creation to the deepest abyssal plains. Mountains crumbled under the weight of divine fury, the sky itself cracked and bled fire, and the earth groaned beneath the footsteps of immortal warriors. Zeus commanded lightning and thunder, wielding bolts forged by the Cyclopes in the depths of Tartarus. Hades brought forth the armies of the dead and shadows that could drain the life from any living thing, but Poseidon's contribution to this war would prove equally devastating and far more enduring. With his mighty trident, a three-pronged weapon of unimaginable power, also crafted by the Cyclopes, Poseidon called forth the first great floods. He summoned tsunamis from nothingness, created whirlpools that could swallow entire armies, and caused the ground itself to liquefy beneath the feet of his enemies. When he struck the earth with his trident, earthquakes rippled outward like waves, toppling the fortresses of the Titans and creating new seas where once dry land had stretched to the horizon. The Titans fought with the fury of beings who had ruled since the dawn of time, but they could not match the innovative tactics and raw determination of the younger gods. Atlas held up the sky itself as a weapon, threatening to crush the Olympians beneath its weight. Prometheus wielded fire as both sword and shield, while Oceanus commanded the primordial waters that had existed since the beginning of time. Yet for all their power, they lacked the unity and strategic brilliance that Zeus brought to the conflict. As the war reached its climax, Poseidon unleashed his most devastating attack. He dove deep into the Earth's core, where molten rock flowed like blood through the planet's veins, and there he struck with his trident. The resulting earthquake was so powerful that it cracked the very foundations of reality, creating fault lines that still exist today, establishing the underground rivers and springs that would become his eternal domain. The shockwaves travelled upward and outward, causing Kronos himself to stumble and fall, creating the opening that Zeus needed for the decisive blow. When victory was finally achieved, the three brothers faced a decision that would determine the fate of all existence. How should they divide the cosmos among themselves? Rather than fight each other for supremacy, they chose to draw lots, allowing chance to determine their domains. Zeus drew the heavens and became king of the gods, ruling from Mount Olympus with thunder and lightning as his weapons. Hades drew the underworld, becoming lord of the dead and all the riches hidden beneath the earth. And Poseidon drew the seas, claiming dominion over all waters, from the vast oceans to the smallest streams, from the rage of hurricanes to the gentle morning dew. But even gods, immortal and untouchable though they may be, carry within them the seeds of longing. Poseidon, whose kingdom stretched farther than any mortal could imagine, sometimes felt a solitude deeper than the Mariana depths. The endless echo of waves was his constant companion. Yet in their rhythm he heard the reminder that all things, even divine, move in cycles of rise and fall. At times, when the surface world slumbered beneath moonlight, he would ascend silently from the sea and walk among the cliffs, his trident disguised as a shepherd's staff, watching mortals dream beside their fires. Their brief lives fascinated him, so fragile, so fleeting, yet capable of creation, love, and courage that rivaled Olympus itself. It was during one such wandering that he first encountered Amphitrite, one of the 50 Nereids, daughters of Nereus and Doris. Her laughter carried across the waves like music born from the sea itself, and for the first time since the dawn of creation, the great Poseidon felt something stir within him that was not anger or ambition, but wonder. Amphitrite, shy yet strong-willed, fled his initial advances, diving deep into coral caverns where even sunlight dared not go. The god's pursuit was relentless, but not cruel. He sent dolphins to sing his devotion and adorned the seabed with pearls and glowing anemones in her honor. At last, moved by his persistence and sincerity, Amphitrite accepted his love. and their union became one of the most enduring in divine history. Their wedding beneath the waves was said to rival even the grand feasts of Olympus. The sea itself became the banquet hall. Coral pillars rose like cathedrals, currents carried garlands of seaweed and flowers from distant shores, and whales sang hymns that shook the ocean floor. From this union came Triton, their son, half man and half fish, who would later serve as his father's herald, blowing a great conch shell to calm or summon the waves. Through Amphitrite, Poseidon learned that power need not always manifest as destruction. The sea could nurture, heal, and protect. The calm after a storm was as sacred as the tempest that preceded it. Yet peace among gods is fragile. Rivalries on Olympus simmered like magma beneath a crust of civility. Though Zeus ruled the heavens and Poseidon the seas, the boundaries between their realms were never perfectly clear. Storms that began in the sky often ended in the ocean, and both brothers claimed dominion over the rain. Their disagreements could reshape entire coastlines. When Zeus's thunder met Poseidon's tide, the resulting fury created tempests that mortals recorded in legend. Sailors caught between lightning and wave would whisper prayers to both brothers, unsure which one controlled their fate. In these conflicts, Poseidon revealed his defiant nature. He did not bow easily, even to the king of gods. When Zeus once punished him for siding with Hera and Athena in a conspiracy against Olympus, Poseidon was cast down to labor among mortals. He and Apollo built the walls of Troy, stone by divine stone, each block fitting so perfectly that no tool marks remained. But when the Trojan king refused to pay for the gods' labor, Poseidon's fury was swift. He sent a monstrous sea serpent to ravage the shores and curse the land so that its soil turned barren. This act would echo through time, sowing the seeds for the epic conflict that would later engulf the city of Troy. The god's relationship with mortals often mirrored the tides he ruled. Generous one moment, devastating the next. He could lift a fisherman's humble boat on a wave of fortune, or dash a fleet of warships against invisible rocks in retribution for arrogance. His favor could crown an empire, his wrath could erase it from maps. The ancient seers of Delphi warned kings that Poseidon's gifts were as dangerous as his anger. Yet for those who sought understanding rather than dominance, he offered guidance. Many claimed that visions of him appeared in dreams, his voice a low rumble, like surf against cliffs, teaching them the secrets of navigation, the building of harbors, or the reading of stars. His interactions with heroes continued to shape the destiny of men. When Odysseus, king of Ithaca, blinded the Cyclops Polyphemus, Poseidon's own son, the god's vengeance became the driving force of the Odyssey. For 10 long years, Odysseus battled not only monsters and witches, but the will of the sea god himself. Poseidon did not seek to destroy the hero outright. Instead, he taught him endurance through suffering, wisdom through loss. Each shipwreck, each near drowning, each moment when hope seemed extinguished, was a lesson in humility before forces beyond mortal comprehension. Only when Odysseus learned respect for both land and sea did Poseidon allow him to return home. Other myths portray a gentler side to the god. Sailors lost in fog would speak of dolphins guiding them to shore, of sudden breaks in the clouds revealing the way home, and of a voice whispering reassurance over the roar of waves. Parents told their children that these were signs of Poseidon's mercy, proof that even the storm has compassion if approached with reverence. His temples stood along every coast, from the rugged cliffs of Saunion to the island harbours of Rhodes, each positioned to face the horizon as if in eternal conversation with the sea. One of the most curious stories tells of Poseidon's encounter with the giant Polybotes, a being of immense strength born from the blood of Uranus. During the Gigantomachy, the great war between gods and giants, Poseidon pursued Polybotes across the Aegean. Their battle thundered beneath the waves for days until the god tore a piece of the island Kos and hurled it atop his enemy, trapping him forever. That fragment became the island of Nisiros. To this day, locals say the rumblings of its volcanic heart are the muffled groans of the buried giant struggling beneath Poseidon's stone. Such tales reinforce the Greeks' belief that their land itself was alive, that earthquakes, eruptions, and shifting seas were not random but divine communication. When the ground trembled beneath their feet, they did not curse the earth. They prayed to the earthshaker to calm his temper. The boundary between myth and natural science was as fluid as the tides. Even philosophers who sought rational explanations spoke of Poseidon with respect, acknowledging that the sea's behavior mirrored the complexities of the human soul, deep, unpredictable, and capable of both creation and destruction. Over time, Poseidon's worship spread far beyond Greece. Mariners from Egypt, Carthage, and Rome adopted his image, blending it with their own sea deities. The Romans knew him as Neptune, a god of order and exploration rather than chaos. Yet the core essence remained: mastery over the vast unknown. Statues of the trident-wielding god appeared in ports and marketplaces, silent reminders that commerce and conquest both depended upon the mercy of the sea. Sailors would toss coins or amphora shards into the waves before departure, small tokens to buy favor from the deity who held their fate. Even inland, Poseidon's influence was felt. Springs, rivers, and fountains were believed to be veins of his domain stretching through the earth. Cities far from the coast built sanctuaries dedicated to him, recognizing that every drop of water, whether from mountain stream or morning dew, ultimately returned to his embrace. His power, like the cycle of rainfall and evaporation, was eternal, and through it all, the god himself changed. Millennia of watching humanity taught him patience. The arrogance that once led him to challenge his brother's authority softened into a quieter, deeper understanding of balance. He came to see mortals not as intruders, but as participants in the great rhythm of existence. When sailors set forth under starry skies, they carried within them a reflection of divine courage, the same spirit that once compelled the gods to battle titans for dominion over chaos. In later ages, poets would imagine Poseidon retreating to the depths, his temple gates closed, his trident resting beside the throne of coral and pearl. But in truth, he never vanished. His essence flows through every tide that caresses the shore, every earthquake that reminds the earth of its living heart, every ripple that spreads across still water when touched by wind. To those who listen closely, at night, when the sea hums like a living thing, his presence can still be felt, vast and patient, eternal as the ocean itself. And so, when you gaze upon the horizon and see the line where sea and sky meet, remember that it is not merely distance you behold, but the meeting of realms. There, beyond sight, yet ever near, stands Poseidon, guardian, judge, and companion to all who venture upon the waters. His story is not confined to scrolls or temples. It continues in the rhythm of every wave, the whisper of every tide. Long after the marble of his sanctuaries has crumbled, his legacy endures in the pulse of the planet, in the salt that flows within our blood, and in the restless yearning that drives humanity to explore what lies beyond the next shore, morning dew. But Poseidon's domain was far more complex than his brothers initially understood. The sea was not merely a body of water, but a living entity with its own moods, its own personality, its own capacity for both creation and destruction. As the new god of the oceans began to explore his realm, he discovered that water connected everything, flowing through underground caverns, rising as mist to form clouds, falling as rain to nourish the earth, and always returning to the sea in an endless cycle of renewal and change. His palace beneath the waves became a wonder that surpassed even the golden halls of Olympus. Built from coral and pearl, decorated with treasures from sunken ships and offerings from grateful sailors, it stood at the bottom of the deepest ocean trench, where the pressure would crush any mortal instantly, but where Poseidon felt most at home. Schools of fish swam through its corridors like living tapestries, while dolphins and whales served as his messengers, carrying his words across the vast expanses of his domain. The sea nymphs, the Nereids, became his first subjects, 50 daughters of the ancient sea god Nereus, who had ruled the waters before the Olympians' rise to power. These beautiful and wise beings helped Poseidon understand the subtle currents that carried ships safely to harbour and the hidden reefs that could dash vessels to pieces. They taught him the songs that whales sang in the deepest trenches and showed him how the tides responded to the moon's eternal dance across the heavens. Yet, Poseidon's influence extended far beyond the ocean's boundaries. As the Earthshaker, he controlled the geological forces that shaped continents, caused volcanic eruptions, and determined where new islands would rise from the sea floor. His trident could split mountains in half or raise new ones from the depths, and his footsteps caused tremors that mortals would learn to fear and respect. Every earthquake was a reminder of his power, every tsunami a demonstration of his wrath or his protection. The god also claimed dominion over horses, those magnificent creatures whose speed and grace reminded him of the waves themselves. Legend tells us that he created the first horse by striking a rock with his trident, bringing forth an animal so beautiful and powerful that it would become humanity's greatest companion in war and peace alike. The connection between horses and the sea god ran deeper than mere creation, for both possessed an untamable wildness, a freedom that could never be fully controlled by mortal hands. As Poseidon established his authority over his vast domain, he began to take notice of the world above the waves, where mortals were beginning to build their first cities and sail their first ships across waters that had never before known the touch of human ambition. These brave or foolish creatures fascinated him, for they dared to venture onto his domain with nothing but wood and canvas to protect them from his infinite power. The earliest mortals who dared venture upon his waters did so with trembling hands and whispered prayers, their crude vessels nothing more than hollowed logs bound together with sinew and hope. Poseidon watched these primitive seafarers with a mixture of amusement and curiosity, studying how they read the wind patterns he created, how they learned to navigate by the stars that reflected in his domain like scattered diamonds on black silk. Some he guided gently to their destinations, sending favourable currents and calm seas. Others, those who showed disrespect or arrogance, he taught harsh lessons about the price of hubris upon the waves. The god's first great intervention in mortal affairs came when he witnessed a coastal tribe being terrorized by a massive sea serpent, a primordial creature left over from the chaotic times before the Titans' defeat. This beast, known as Cetus, possessed scales harder than bronze and venom that could poison entire bays, turning crystal-clear waters into fetid pools of death. The creature had been devouring fishing boats and their crews, growing larger and more aggressive with each meal until the entire coastline lived in perpetual fear. Poseidon descended from his coral palace, rising through fathoms of water until he broke the surface during a storm of his own creation. Lightning illuminated his magnificent form as he stood upon the churning waves, his trident crackling with divine energy, his beard flowing like sea foam in the hurricane winds. The battle that followed shook the very foundations of the ocean floor, creating underwater canyons that exist to this day, and generating waves so massive that they carried shells and sea creatures far inland, where they would fossilize and puzzle future generations. When Cetus lunged forward with jaws wide enough to swallow a ship, Poseidon caught the beast by its throat and lifted it high above the waves. With a single thrust of his trident, he pinned the serpent to the ocean floor, where its thrashing created the first great whirlpool. As the creature's life force ebbed away, Poseidon transformed its massive body into an underwater mountain range, ensuring that its death would serve as a foundation for new coral reefs and sanctuaries for smaller sea creatures. The grateful mortals built their first temple to Poseidon on the cliffs overlooking the battlefield, offering the finest fish from their nets and the most precious pearls from their dives. They composed the first sea shanties in his honor, songs that would be passed down through generations of sailors, each verse adding new details to the legend of the god who had saved them from certain destruction. These early hymns spoke of his eyes that flashed like sunlight on water, his voice that could calm the fiercest storm or summon tempests from clear skies. As centuries passed and mortal civilizations grew more sophisticated, Poseidon's relationship with humanity became increasingly complex. He took particular interest in those who made their living from the sea, the fishermen who understood the ocean's moods, the merchants who risked everything on dangerous voyages, the explorers who pushed beyond known horizons in search of new lands and opportunities. These brave souls earned his respect through their willingness to face the unknown, to trust their lives to his ever-changing domain. The god began to manifest in more subtle ways, appearing to mortals not always in his full divine glory, but sometimes as an old fisherman with knowing eyes, a stranger who offered crucial advice about weather patterns, or a mysterious captain whose ship appeared just when rescue was needed most. These interventions became the stuff of legend, tales told in harbours and taverns across the ancient world, stories that gave hope to those who would follow in the footsteps of earlier sea travellers. Yet Poseidon's nature contained multitudes that mortals struggled to comprehend. He could be benevolent and wrathful within the same day, sometimes within the same hour. A ship's crew might wake to perfect sailing conditions, only to find themselves battling mountainous waves by afternoon, if they had somehow offended the sea god through careless words or disrespectful actions. This unpredictability became central to how ancient peoples understood the ocean itself, a force of nature that could nurture life or destroy it without warning. The gods' romantic entanglements began to shape coastlines and create new forms of life in ways that would echo through mythology for millennia. When he fell in love with Demeter, goddess of the harvest, she fled from his advances by transforming herself into a mare and hiding among a herd of wild horses. Undeterred, Poseidon assumed the form of a magnificent stallion and pursued her across meadows and mountains, their divine chase creating rivers and valleys wherever their hooves touched the earth. Their eventual union produced Arion, a horse of supernatural speed and intelligence who could speak with human voice and whose mane shimmered with all the colours of the sea at sunset. This divine steed would later serve heroes in their greatest quests, carrying them across battlefields and through adventures that ordinary horses could never survive. The birth of Arion also established Poseidon's deep connection to these noble animals, explaining why horses were always sacrificed at his altars, and why the sound of galloping hooves was said to echo the rhythm of waves upon the shore. Another of Poseidon's great loves was the Gorgon Medusa, before her transformation into the monster whose gaze could turn men to stone. In those ancient days, she was renowned as the most beautiful of her sisters, with hair like spun gold and eyes that reflected the depths of ocean trenches. Their passionate encounter took place within the sacred temple of Athena, a violation of holy ground that would have consequences reaching far beyond their moment of desire. When Athena discovered the desecration of her temple, her fury knew no bounds. Rather than punish the god who was her equal in power, she turned her wrath upon Medusa, transforming the beautiful maiden into a creature so hideous that her very appearance would petrify any who looked upon her. Scales replaced smooth skin, serpents grew from her scalp in place of golden hair, and her lovely eyes became orbs of such terrible power that they could stop a beating heart with a single glance. Poseidon felt genuine remorse for the fate that had befallen his lover, though he was powerless to reverse Athena's curse. Instead, he ensured that when Medusa was finally slain by the hero Perseus, her death would not be in vain. From her severed neck sprang Chrysaor, a giant warrior of incredible strength, and Pegasus, the winged horse whose ability to fly made him a bridge between earth and sky, between Poseidon's terrestrial realm and the heavens ruled by Zeus. Pegasus became one of Poseidon's greatest gifts to the world, a creature that embodied both the power of the sea and the freedom of the air. When the magnificent winged horse struck Mount Helicon with his hoof, he created the Hippocrene Spring, whose waters would inspire poets and artists for generations. The connection between creativity and Poseidon's domain ran deeper than most mortals realized, for the rhythm of waves had always been the first music, and the patterns of tides had taught humanity their earliest lessons about the passage of time. As the age of heroes dawned, Poseidon found himself increasingly involved in the affairs of mortals who dared to accomplish feats that rivaled the gods themselves. His relationship with these extraordinary individuals was complex, marked by moments of both tremendous aid and terrible punishment, depending on whether they showed proper respect for his power and domain. The hero Theseus, son of Aegeus, king of Athens, claimed Poseidon as his divine father, though the truth of his parentage remained deliberately ambiguous. When challenged to prove his divine heritage, Theseus dove into the sea and returned with a ring that had been thrown into the depths, along with a golden crown given to him by Amphitrite, Poseidon's wife and queen of the seas. This demonstration of favor marked the beginning of a complex relationship between god and hero that would shape the destiny of Athens itself. Poseidon's influence extended to the very foundations of the cities that mortals built along his shores. When the goddess Athena and he competed for the patronage of the great city that would become Athens, their contest revealed the fundamental difference in their approaches to mortal civilization. Poseidon struck the Acropolis with his trident, creating a spring of salt water and causing the first horse to emerge from the stone. His gifts represented power, mobility, and the vast possibilities that lay beyond the horizon for those brave enough to sail toward them. Athena, in response, planted the first olive tree, offering the mortals wisdom, sustenance, and the promise of peace through cultivation and knowledge. The citizens chose Athena's gift, recognizing that while Poseidon's offerings were magnificent, they needed the stability and nourishment that the olive represented. Yet the sea god was not entirely spurned, for Athens became one of the greatest maritime powers in the ancient world, its ships carrying trade and culture across the Mediterranean under his protection. The rejection stung Poseidon's pride, but it also taught him valuable lessons about the nature of mortal needs and desires. He began to understand that humans required not just power and adventure, but also security and predictability. This wisdom would influence how he interacted with the great seafaring civilizations that would rise and fall over the coming centuries, each learning to balance their respect for his might with their need for safe passage across his domain. The construction of great harbors and ports became acts of worship in themselves, as mortals learned to work with Poseidon's power rather than against it. They studied the patterns of his tides, built their docks to accommodate the rise and fall of waters, and designed their ships to ride the swells he sent rather than fight them. The most successful maritime cultures were those that recognized the sea god as a partner rather than an adversary, offering prayers and sacrifices not just for protection, but in gratitude for the opportunities his realm provided. The great harbors of antiquity became monuments to this newfound understanding between mortal ambition and divine power. In Crete, the palace of Knossos stood as testament to a civilization that had learned to dance with the rhythms of the sea rather than merely survive them. The Minoan people, with their elaborate frescoes depicting dolphins and octopi, their ships that could navigate by reading the subtle changes in wave patterns, represented humanity's first true partnership with Poseidon's realm. King Minos himself claimed descent from Europa, whom Zeus had carried across the waves in the form of a great white bull. This royal bloodline carried with it an intimate understanding of divine nature, and Minos knew that to rule an island kingdom, he must first secure the blessing of the sea god who controlled the waters surrounding his domain. The king approached Poseidon with a request that would test the boundaries between mortal ambition and divine will. Standing upon the cliffs of Crete as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Minos raised his arms to the churning heavens and called upon Poseidon to send him a sign of divine approval for his reign. He promised that whatever emerged from the sea would be sacrificed in the god's honor, a pledge that seemed reasonable given the usual offerings of fish and dolphins that the ocean provided. But Poseidon, intrigued by this bold mortal king, decided to send something far more magnificent than Minos had anticipated. From the foam and spray of the crashing waves emerged a bull so perfect it seemed carved from living marble, its hide pure white as sea foam, its eyes holding depths that reflected the mysteries of ocean trenches. This was no ordinary creature, but a divine manifestation of Poseidon's power, created specifically to test the king's devotion and honor. The bull's breath misted like sea spray, and when it moved, the sound of its hooves on stone echoed like waves breaking against rocky shores. Minos gazed upon this magnificent creature and felt his heart torn between duty and desire. The bull was so beautiful, so obviously touched by divine power, that sacrificing it seemed almost sacrilegious. Instead, he made a decision that would echo through generations of his bloodline. He kept Poseidon's bull for himself, substituting another animal for the promised sacrifice, believing that the god would understand his desire to preserve such perfect beauty. But Poseidon's understanding extended far beyond Minos's mortal reasoning. The sea god recognized the king's deception immediately, feeling the insult like a cold current in the deepest parts of his realm. The promise had been clear, the terms accepted, and now mortal pride sought to cheat divine will. Such hubris could not stand unpunished, but Poseidon's revenge would be subtle, personal, and devastating in ways that Minos could never anticipate. The god's wrath manifested not as earthquake or tsunami, but as an unnatural passion that struck Queen Pasiphae with the force of a rogue wave. She found herself consumed with desire for the white bull, a longing so intense it bordered on madness. This was Poseidon's masterpiece of divine justice, turning the king's prized possession into the instrument of his family's destruction. The queen's obsession led her to commission the master craftsman Daedalus to create a wooden cow so realistic that it could deceive the divine bull. From this union, born of divine punishment and human ingenuity, came the Minotaur, a creature that was part man and part bull, possessing a hunger that could never be satisfied, and a rage that echoed the fury of the sea god who had orchestrated its conception. The monster became the dark heart of the labyrinth beneath Minos's palace, a maze so complex that even its creator could barely navigate its twisting passages. Every 7 years, Athens would send tribute of young men and women to feed this living reminder of what happened when mortals attempted to deceive the gods. The labyrinth itself became a symbol of Poseidon's complex nature, its winding passages reflecting the unpredictable currents of the sea, its dead ends echoing the fate of sailors who misread the ocean's moods. At its center lurked not treasure or wisdom, but a creature that embodied the consequences of broken promises and divine retribution. The myth spread throughout the Mediterranean world, serving as a warning to all who would make bargains with the gods and then attempt to renegotiate the terms. Yet even in his anger, Poseidon maintained his role as protector of those who honored their word and respected his domain. The hero Theseus, when he came to slay the Minotaur, did so with the sea god's tacit approval, for the young prince had proven his divine heritage in the depths of the ocean itself. The ball of thread that guided Theseus through the labyrinth shimmered with an otherworldly light, some said, as if touched by sea foam, leading him true through passages that might otherwise have claimed his life. The death of the Minotaur marked not just the end of a monster, but the resolution of a divine punishment that had run its course. Poseidon's justice had been served, and the balance between mortal ambition and divine will had been restored. The white bull, its purpose fulfilled, simply vanished one morning, leaving behind only hoofprints in the sand that the tide quickly erased. Some claimed it returned to the sea from whence it came, while others believed it ascended to the heavens to become the constellation Taurus, forever reminding mortals of the consequences of broken faith. As the Minoan civilization reached its height, their artists created frescoes that captured Poseidon's essence in ways that went beyond mere representation. The famous bull-leaping ceremonies that took place in the palace courtyards were more than entertainment or religious ritual. They were elaborate dances that mimicked the relationship between mortals and the sea itself, requiring participants to read the rhythm of a charging bull, just as sailors must read the rhythm of approaching waves. The young men and women who performed these dangerous acrobatics trained for years to develop the timing, courage, and grace necessary to vault over the horns of a charging bull and land safely on its back. Their movements flowed like water, and their success depended on the same intuitive understanding of natural forces that guided fishermen through dangerous storms and navigators across uncharted seas. Each successful leap was a prayer made manifest, a demonstration of humanity's ability to work in harmony with forces far greater than themselves. But the ocean's memory is long, and Poseidon had not forgotten the civilizations that had honored him in ages past. The Minoans, despite their king's transgression, had maintained their reverence for the sea through generations of careful observation and respectful practice. Their ships ventured farther than any had gone before, establishing trade routes that connected distant lands and carrying with them the cultural innovations that would shape the ancient world. The sudden collapse of Minoan civilization came not from divine wrath, but from the Earth's own violent movements. The volcanic island of Thera, sacred to Poseidon as a place where fire and water met in spectacular displays of natural power, erupted with such force that it sent tsunamis racing across the Mediterranean. The waves that struck Crete were taller than palace walls, carrying away centuries of accumulated wisdom and leaving behind only ruins and memories. Some said that Poseidon wept for the loss of a civilization that had learned to understand his nature so well. The tears of a sea god, however, are indistinguishable from ordinary salt water, and they were quickly absorbed into the vast expanse of his domain. Yet the knowledge that the Minoans had gained through their partnership with the sea did not entirely perish. It passed to other maritime peoples, the Phoenicians and Greeks, who would build upon the foundations of oceanic wisdom that the Minoans had established. The Phoenicians, master traders and navigators, developed their own relationship with Poseidon based on practical necessity and mutual respect. Their ships, painted with eyes on the bow so they could see through dangerous waters, carried cargoes of precious metals, fine textiles, and exotic goods across routes that spanned from Britain to the coasts of Africa. They established colonies wherever natural harbours provided safe anchorage, spreading their knowledge of navigation and shipbuilding to peoples who had never ventured far from shore. These skilled mariners developed the first comprehensive charts of Mediterranean currents and wind patterns, creating maps that were closely guarded secrets passed down through families of sea captains. They learned to read the colour of water to determine its depth, to identify approaching storms by the behaviour of seabirds, and to navigate by stars whose reflections danced on the ocean's surface like scattered diamonds. Their cities of Tyre and Sidon became centres of maritime innovation, where new techniques for shipbuilding and navigation were constantly being developed and refined. The Phoenicians' most famous contribution to human civilization was their alphabet, a system of writing that was far simpler than the complex hieroglyphs or cuneiform scripts used by other ancient peoples. This innovation spread throughout the Mediterranean world, carried by traders whose ships touched every major port and many remote harbours. In a sense, the alphabet itself was a gift from Poseidon, for it was the needs of maritime commerce that drove its development and the sea routes that ensured its widespread adoption. The god watched with approval as these master navigators pushed the boundaries of the known world, their ships disappearing beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the mysterious waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Some returned with tales of distant lands and strange peoples, while others vanished entirely, becoming part of the sea's vast collection of stories that would never be fully told. Each voyage was an act of faith in Poseidon's protection, a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be confined by fear or ignorance. Yet for all their skill and courage, even the Phoenicians learned that the sea demanded respect above all else. Ships that sailed without proper offerings might find themselves becalmed in waters smooth as glass, their crews slowly dying of thirst while surrounded by the infinite expanse of undrinkable ocean. Captains who showed arrogance toward the sea god's power might discover their vessels surrounded by sea creatures of unusual size and aggression, their hulls scraped by tentacles longer than their masts were tall. The most successful Phoenician traders were those who understood that every voyage was a negotiation with forces beyond mortal control. They timed their departures to coincide with favorable tides, made offerings at every port of call, and maintained shrines to Poseidon aboard their vessels, where daily prayers were offered for safe passage and profitable trading. Their ships were floating temples as much as commercial enterprises, carrying the presence of the sea god with them wherever they sailed. As the Phoenician civilization gradually gave way to the rising power of Greece, Poseidon found himself worshipped by a people whose relationship with the sea was both more intimate and more complex than any who had come before. The Greeks were not merely traders or fishermen, but philosophers and poets who sought to understand the deeper meanings behind natural phenomena. They saw in Poseidon's domain not just a highway for commerce or a source of food, but a reflection of the fundamental forces that shaped existence itself. The Greek understanding of Poseidon evolved beyond the simple equation of divine power with natural forces. They recognized him as a god of boundaries, the deity who controlled the liminal spaces where one element met another. At the shoreline where land met sea, in the underground springs where hidden waters emerged into daylight, in the storms where sea and sky became indistinguishable, there Poseidon's true nature revealed itself most clearly. This sophisticated understanding of divine nature influenced how the Greeks approached maritime activities. Their ships were blessed not just for protection, but as participants in a cosmic dance that connected the human world with the realm of the gods. Every voyage became a pilgrimage, every safe harbour a sacred space where mortals could give thanks for divine favour. The rhythms of rowing and sailing were seen as prayers made physical. The movements of oars through water, a form of worship that honoured the sea god through action rather than words. The great Greek colonies that spread across the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts were established not through conquest alone, but through a careful process of negotiation with the local manifestations of Poseidon's power. Each new settlement required the identification of appropriate sites for temples and shrines, the establishment of proper festivals and sacrificial practices, and the integration of local maritime traditions with Greek religious customs. This process created a network of interconnected communities that shared not just trade relationships, but spiritual bonds forged through common reverence for the sea god's authority. The Olympic Games themselves included competitions that honoured Poseidon's domain, from chariot races that celebrated his connection to horses, to ship races that demonstrated human mastery of maritime skills under divine patronage. The winners of these contests were seen as having received the god's blessing, their victories interpreted as signs of divine favour that might extend to their home cities and families. The olive wreaths that crowned Olympic champions were often blessed with seawater, symbolically connecting terrestrial achievement with oceanic power. The philosophical schools that emerged in Greek coastal cities developed elaborate theories about Poseidon's role in the cosmic order, seeing in his dominion over waters a reflection of the fundamental principle of change that governed all existence. The philosopher Thales of Miletus, himself from a city whose prosperity depended entirely on maritime trade, declared that water was the primary substance from which all things emerged and to which they would eventually return. This was not mere speculation, but observation, born from a lifetime spent watching the endless cycle of evaporation and precipitation, the way rivers carried sediment to create new land, and how the sea both gave life and reclaimed it. These early natural philosophers understood that Poseidon's realm was not static, but eternally dynamic, a vast system of currents and countercurrents that connected every part of the known world. They mapped the seasonal patterns of his moods, noting how certain winds always preceded storms, how the colour and taste of seawater could indicate the approach of different weather systems, and how marine life behaved differently when changes were coming to their underwater domain. The mystery cults that developed around Poseidon offered initiates direct experience of the god's transformative power through ritual immersion in sacred pools connected to the sea by underground channels. These ceremonies, conducted in caverns where the boundary between earth and water became meaningless, promise participants a glimpse of the divine consciousness that animated all flowing things. The initiates emerged from these experiences speaking of visions where they had swum alongside dolphins through coral cities, or stood within underwater temples where the walls themselves pulsed with the rhythm of cosmic tides. The cult of Poseidon at Cape Sunion represented the pinnacle of Greek devotional architecture, its marble columns rising from cliff tops that commanded sweeping views of the Aegean Sea. Here, at the southern tip of Attica, sailors would stop to make offerings before embarking on dangerous voyages, and returning crews would climb the temple steps to leave gifts of gratitude for safe passage. The temple's position allowed worshippers to witness the daily drama of sunset over water, when the boundary between sea and sky dissolved into bands of gold and crimson that seemed to reveal the very essence of divine beauty. The priests of this cliff-top sanctuary developed elaborate rituals timed to coincide with the movements of celestial bodies, understanding that Poseidon's influence extended beyond the physical ocean to encompass the cosmic waters that the ancients believed surrounded the entire universe. During the summer solstice, when the sun reached its highest point above the temple, they would pour libations of wine mixed with seawater into carefully carved channels that carried the offering down through the rock to emerge at springs near the waterline below. These ceremonies created a physical connection between the elevated realm of human worship and the mysterious depths of divine power, allowing mortals to participate directly in the circulation of sacred substances between different levels of reality. The wine represented the products of human cultivation and craft, while the seawater carried the essence of Poseidon's untamed domain. Their mixture and subsequent journey through stone symbolized the ongoing negotiation between civilization and wildness that defined Greek maritime culture. The temple's acoustics were carefully designed to amplify the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below, creating a natural symphony that accompanied all religious activities. Priests learned to time their chanted prayers to harmonize with this rhythmic percussion, their voices rising and falling like the tides themselves. Pilgrims often reported that after hours of listening to this combination of human and natural music, they began to hear responses in the wind and waves, as if Poseidon himself were participating in the liturgical dialogue. The architectural innovations developed for seaside temples influenced Greek building practices throughout the Mediterranean world, as architects learned to create structures that could withstand the corrosive effects of salt air while maintaining the aesthetic perfection that Greek religious sensibilities demanded. They discovered new techniques for cutting and fitting stone blocks so precisely that no mortar was needed, creating joints so tight that centuries of storms could not penetrate them. The marble itself was selected for its ability to take on different colors as light conditions changed, appearing pale gold at dawn, brilliant white at midday, and rose-colored at sunset. These temples became centers of learning where scholars studied the practical applications of mathematics and engineering required for successful maritime ventures, the calculation of distances across open water, the determination of a ship's position using celestial observations, and the prediction of tidal patterns, all required sophisticated mathematical knowledge that was preserved and transmitted through temple schools. Students learn geometry by studying the perfect proportions of temple architecture, astronomy by tracking the movements of stars reflected in sacred pools, and physics by observing how different materials behaved when subjected to the constant pressure of wind and spray. The integration of practical seamanship with religious devotion reached its highest expression in the design of Greek warships, where every element served both tactical and spiritual purposes. The bronze rams that adorned the prows of triremes were shaped like dolphins or sea serpents, creatures sacred to Poseidon that were believed to guide the vessels toward victory in battle. The rhythmic chanting of oarsmen served as both coordination technique and continuous prayer, their synchronized movements creating a meditative state that connected the entire crew with the divine power that propelled their ship through the water. Naval battles became elaborate rituals of divine judgment, where victory was interpreted as evidence of the gods' favor and defeat as punishment for impiety or injustice. Before engaging enemy fleets, Greek commanders would perform elaborate sacrifices on their flagship decks, pouring libations into the sea while invoking Poseidon's protection for their cause. The blood of sacrificial animals mixed with seawater was seen as creating a covenant between mortal warriors and divine power, binding the god to support those who had honored him properly. The great sea battle of Salamis, where Greek naval forces defeated the massive Persian fleet, was remembered not merely as a tactical victory, but as divine intervention on behalf of a people who had maintained proper relationships with the sea god. Survivors reported seeing Poseidon's trident gleaming beneath the waves as Greek ships maneuvered through channels too shallow for their enemies' larger vessels. The victory was celebrated with festivals that lasted for days, featuring dramatic reenactments of the battle where actors playing Poseidon appeared from beneath floating stages to crown the victorious Greek admirals. The Persian defeat at Salamis marked a turning point in how Mediterranean peoples understood the relationship between divine favor and military success. The massive resources of the Persian Empire had proved insufficient to overcome the Greeks' intimate knowledge of their local waters and their sophisticated understanding of how to work in partnership with rather than against the sea's natural patterns. This lesson resonated throughout the ancient world, influencing how subsequent maritime powers approached both naval warfare and the religious practices that supported their fleets. The age of Athenian maritime dominance that followed the Persian Wars saw Poseidon's worship evolve into something approaching a state religion, with the god's festivals becoming occasions for displaying both military might and cultural sophistication. The Panathenaic procession included elaborate ship carts carrying sacred objects through the streets of Athens, their sails billowing in artificial winds created by hidden mechanisms that demonstrated the city's technological ingenuity. These wheeled vessels, decorated with scenes from Poseidon's mythical adventures, served as mobile temples that brought the presence of the sea god into the heart of the inland city. The wealth flowing into Athens from its maritime empire funded unprecedented artistic achievements, many of which celebrated humanity's complex relationship with the sea. The Parthenon's sculptural program included scenes of Poseidon's contest with Athena for the city's patronage, but these were rendered with a sophistication that recognized the complementary nature of their divine gifts rather than simple competition. The olive tree and the horse, their respective offerings to the Athenian people, were shown as equally valuable contributions to human flourishing. And so, we reach the end of our journey through the vast depths of Poseidon's eternal domain, having traced his path from imprisoned godling to sovereign ruler of all waters that flow across our world. We have witnessed his birth from chaos, his liberation from darkness, and his ascension to power through cosmic war. We have seen him shape coastlines with his breath, topple mountains with his trident, and breathe life into the first horses that would carry heroes across battlefields and through legend. From the primitive sailors who first dared venture upon his waves with trembling hands, to the sophisticated maritime civilizations that learned to read his moods and honor his power, we have explored how humanity's relationship with the sea god evolved from fear to partnership, from simple survival to profound spiritual understanding. The temples that crowned his cliff tops, the festivals that celebrated his gifts, and the myths that preserved his memory, all speak to a truth that transcends the boundaries of ancient belief. For Poseidon remains with us still, in every wave that crashes against distant shores, in every earthquake that reminds us of forces beyond our control, in every storm that humbles our modern vessels, just as it did the wooden ships of antiquity. His story is the story of our eternal dance with the untamable elements, our ongoing negotiation between civilization and wildness, our perpetual journey across waters both literal and metaphorical toward horizons that promise both adventure and transformation. Let the rhythm of his tides carry you now toward peaceful shores, where dreams flow like gentle currents and sleep comes as naturally as waves returning to the sea.